Our next and final speaker this morning is Michael Polkinghorne. Now, Michael has 38 years experience in the banking industry, with 31 years of those providing financial solutions to farmers, small businesses, commercial and home loan customers. Now, Michael bought into a Bank of Queensland franchise in 2006. Bank of Queensland was the only bank operating under a small business franchise model. And after 18 and a half years of operating the franchise, Bank of Queensland made a business decision to buy back all their franchise models, with this process being finalised in February 2025. Now, after a few months' break, he has stepped back into the financial space and is now working with Esdale Sinclair Finance Brokers in Rockhampton. He's going to provide some insights this morning into his small business career with Bank of Queensland. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Polkinghorne.
Thank you, everyone. I always hate being last speaker because you have to follow people like Trent and Natalie, but that's how it works out. But yes, in February 2025, after 18 and a half years, Bank of Queensland closed the door on our franchises. Now, we had 6 months' notice. 6 months sounds like a lot of time, but when you've done that for such a long period of time, it actually was too much notice. It was, it just took too long to happen. We knew it was going to happen. We got past the shock of it happening, but we wanted to move on, and that 6 months was quite tough. So, but anyway, the 18th of February the 28th of February rolled around. At that stage, there were 65% of the branches of Bank of Queensland operating as franchises, and on the 28th of February, it became zero. That in itself is a different story for another day. But I'm here today just to give you some reflection on what it was like to work in a banking franchise, which was the only one in Australia. So back in 2006, some friends of mine rang me up, and I was working at a finance broker at the time, and said, "Hey, Michael, you want to buy a Bank of Queensland franchise?" I said, "Who's Bank of Queensland?" Like, I'd seen the name on TV, but they had, in the broking space I was working in, Bank of Queensland had zero profile. Matter of fact, I think at that stage they weren't even dealing with finance brokers as such. So I said, "Well, why do I want to do this?" Because you get to work with your mates. And I'm going, "Yeah, okay, well, I'll have a bit of a think about it." So we got some facts and figures together and had a bit of a look at it. We decided, well, we're going to give this a roll. So at the time, initially, there was 5 partners. Three of the partners already had a Bank of Queensland franchise in another location, and then myself and Matt were dragged in to be the faces of BOQ North Rockhampton. The other partners, for all intents and purposes, were silent partners, and we drove the ship. It was a pretty steep learning curve, as you can imagine, going into a banking franchise, because there was A, no blueprint, B, nothing you could read up on, and C, limited training when you walked in the door. A matter of fact, I remember walking in the door and I had like the regional manager there going, "Well, hey, Michael, yep, hey, keen, ready to go?" "Yeah, mate, I'm keen to go. Where's my instruction manual for today about how we're going to open up and operate the branch?" And they just went, "Oh, we don't need one of those." And we're just going, okay. So we learned early in the piece we're going to have to wing it to some degree, which is a bit of a worry when you've got a bank. But also we had to rest on the advice and knowledge of the existing other partners who have been operating for 2 years. Thank God we have those 3 partners who came involved with us, because they basically guided us for the best part of 15, 18 months, because there was no blueprint to operate those branches, which was quite interesting. One of the things we identified early in the piece was a few of the things that we thought that were going to, I guess, cause us concern. And probably some of the things we identified before we actually bought into the business was the fact we had no capital. So we're going to have to borrow this money. So luckily, we're buying a BOQ franchise, so you were hoping that BOQ was actually going to give us the money to buy into it. But obviously, we needed to be reasonably strong at that stage. We did own some properties and things like that, so that made it a bit easier for us to raise that capital to invest into that franchise. But just as a matter of interest, back in 2006, that franchise investment cost was $600,000 back in 2006. So that $600,000 in today's money is probably about 1.6 million or 1.4 million. So it was quite a significant investment that we had to make at that time to get in. As I said, I knew who Bank of Queensland was, but they had no profile. So we'd identified that as a real issue for us moving into the Bank of Queensland franchise. Never operated a small business before, so obviously a little bit daunting going into having to manage your own bookwork, marketing, all those sorts of things. And we didn't really know how to run a bank. Luckily, we'd both worked in a bank, myself and Matt, my business partner, and we'd both basically started as a bank as a teller, so we'd moved up through the ranks, so we knew all the roles and how they operated within an actual bank itself. Some of the things I think we did right when we started, which sort of set us up for success as we rolled through our years of service, was probably firstly, we actually set up a partnership agreement. Now, one of the things I quickly got to learn is that if you were to ask one of my customers, do they have a partnership agreement, in a lot of cases they go, what are you talking about? A partnership agreement was an agreement we set up to actually set out how we were going to operate that franchise. It basically set out who had what shareholdings. It specified what was required if one partner wanted to sell out. It specified how we were going to go and raise capital. It was a fairly detailed document. Now, when someone first suggested that we do a partnership agreement, I'm sort of going, I don't really think this is necessary, but thank God we did. The beauty of the partnership agreement was, in 18 and a half years, I think Matt and I probably had 2 disagreements. Now, neither of those disagreements were significant, but we actually opened up our partnership agreements, went back to, because we wanted to make some changes within the business, went back, read it and like, well, that's what it is. So do we want to change that? No. So that blueprint document allowed us to make a decision on how we're going to drive our business forward. The other positive about that was, after being in the business for 2 or 3 years, we actually bought out our partners. So it was there in black and white how that process had to work. One of our partners at the time tried to reinvent the wheel. However, they had no argument because it was in black and white how they had to do it. So it all did go through quite smoothly. I guess the next thing that getting back to what Natalie was saying, we backed ourselves. We thought, I shouldn't say we thought, we knew we would be successful. We knew we had good backgrounds in building relationships with our customers, and we knew that we had a good understanding of how banking would work. So despite everything else that might have been thrown in our way, we felt that we could be successful. So like a lot of small businesses, the first 5 to 7 years were an epic voyage, is the best way to describe it. I think in the first 7 years, I didn't have more than 2 weeks holiday in a calendar year. So we worked like dogs. Quite often we would do 60, 70 hours a week. And we created this massive wave of growth that Trent mentioned as well. And because we had only just started making some money and drawing wages, we decided that we needed to be the ship that actually rode this wave. It was at times very stressful. It was at times quite daunting, but on the other side of the coins, it was extremely rewarding because all of a sudden money was flowing into the bank account. So we felt the beauty of our business, Trent, was that the bank would pay 7 days after the end of the month. Every month, we knew that we would have money in our bank account within 7 days. A lot of businesses don't get paid for 30, 60, 90 days. We were getting paid on 7 days, which was absolutely awesome. So after that 5 to 7 years, we started to realise maybe we should start actually hiring for the work that was going to be ahead of us. So we actually took some steps towards putting people on in advance of what the workloads were that we thought were going to arrive, and we started to claim back some of our personal life, and that sort of once again set us up for the future because A, it made our families happy, and at the end of the day, if our families are happy, we were happy. Looking back, probably the 3 biggest challenges I saw, firstly was BOQ was only a very small company with a very small suite of products. Also, their IT, for one, to describe in one word, was terrible. And that probably continued to be the case for about the next 18 years. IT was our biggest inhibitor. but we made do. What we realised early in the piece is if we could build relationships with our customers, whether they be pensioners, small business customers, wage earners, farmers, whoever, if we could build successful relationships with our customers, they would stay with us. And that is, to this day, the only we end up tripling the size of our portfolio over that 18 years. We've, for an 8-person branch, we had something like 500 million in assets when we finished up, which is quite significant for just a small branch in North Rockhampton. So we experienced a really good wave of growth, and we were very happy with how things went. The other thing that we did struggle with at different occasions was motivation. So motivation motivation when things are going great. Because you're quite easy, you can sit on the top of the tree and you can rest on your laurels and you can watch the cash flow in. You can wash your bits and watch the cash flow in. You can take a few extra days off here and there, and life is so good. But when you've got a 7 or 8 person staff, and then you lose 2 staff, for example, in 2 weeks, all of a sudden you go, that whole feeling of life so easy becomes quite tough. So eventually we learnt some lessons from there, and to say that nothing is for granted, like your personal life and your business life, nothing is for granted. So we actually started to get back in the process of planning for the future. The first thing that we found that we would drop when life got too good was planning. And then we'd have to crisis manage when something bit us on the foot. I guess the other one was staffing. In 18 and a half years, and please don't get upset with this, but in 18 and a half years, we had over 80 staff pass through our doors. Now, whether 80 staff is a lot in 18 and a half years, we still have that debate, me and my business partner, every now and again. But we were a 7 or 8 staff branch at any given time. Now, a lot goes through your mind when a staff pass through your branch. Things like, I think I've got a great working environment. I can't understand why these people want to leave. It must be them, not me. So it became it always was, and undoubtedly the staff would choose to leave when things are going great, which is both a positive and a negative. What I did learn from my 18 and a half years of trying to manage staff is that some staff just want the best pay possible. Well, if that's their motivator, you're not going to keep them. So maximise them and use them efficiently and effectively for the time that you do have them. Some staff wanted incentives and bonuses. Our best staff member we ever had was an 18-year-old, and we offered her at the time. We were selling insurances through the bank, and she became the second best seller of insurance in Australia. Well, within our Bank of Queensland system, in about 2 years. She was like a vulture. She knew the product, but also she knew that at the end of every month we were giving her extra $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, but she was making good money for us. So, but the downside of that is an insurance broker in town came along and poached her. So, but that's because of the training and experience. But we couldn't. We expected to lose her, and I think that's something that I did learn was eventually that the lifespan of one of our front office employees was 3 to 4 years. And if we got 3 to 4 years out of our staff, then we did well. If we didn't get 3 or 4 years out of them, then something we've done when it was amiss. Some staff want flexible hours. If at all possible, try and accommodate that. We did, particularly in our last 5 to 7 years, we tried to build a flexible working environment. But on the other point, some staff just want to come to work to have a daily interaction. We had several key staff over many, many years who worked for us for long periods of time, didn't care what their pay was, didn't really care what their job was, but at the end of the day, they loved their work family. So just remember, if you've got a small business, sometimes people are working in your business because they just want to be there. The only other point I want to make is around looking after your own mental health and well-being. That first 7 years we worked, thankfully we both had very understanding wives. But I guess the one thing I want to acknowledge is I had young kids in that first 7 years, and those first 7 years I missed a lot of interaction, which I sort of regret now. But then all of a sudden I woke up and I realised that, okay, well look, family to me is most important, my business is second important, and everything else sort of rolls out from there. So I decided that I would start to claim back some of my personal time, and which I did and continue to do for the next sort of 10 to 12 years. But the only other thing I'm going to say is it's okay to take a holiday. It's okay to have a week off. It's okay to go to golf on a Thursday afternoon if you want to. It's okay to take an afternoon or take your family to the beach. That's fine. Because they're going to remember those things. They're going to remember that you looked after yourself. It's okay to take some time off to go to the gym or spend some time on your own health. But just remember, everyone in small business does have periods of stress and hard times. And if things do become too tough, don't be afraid to reach out to one of your friends or family, reach out to a professional, reach out to one of your mentors, or reach out to accountants, doctors or solicitors. I actually had a period where I actually had some mental health issues at one point in time. Best thing I did was go to a psychiatrist. I was lucky, within a 6-month period, I was back working effectively and strongly as I ever did before, but I had changed some priorities around and never looked back from there. So that's about as much as I can tell you about working in BOQ for 18.5 years. Thank you.